The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's always an honour to rise on behalf of the residents of Kelowna Lake Country. After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, housing, gas and groceries cost more, and hardworking Canadians increasingly can't pay their bills. Yet this NDP Liberal government wants the carbon tax to continue to rise, to add 61 cents per litre, driving up the cost of almost everything. When you tax those who farm, who transport, who warehouse, who retail, you tax the one who buys. Families already will be paying $700 more for food this year than in 2023. The carbon tax has already been such a costly disaster for Canadian small businesses and for family pocketbooks that there are fewer politicians in Canada now defending it. In their latest desperate publicity stunt, both the leader of the NDP here and the NDP Premier of British Columbia have tried to make Canadians believe that now, on the eve of or with the possibility of elections, they were opposed to carbon taxes, that they have strongly supported their entire political careers. But who can believe their baloney? The NDP in this House voted to defend the carbon tax 24 separate times in this House, even though 70% of Canadians wanted to cancel the increase earlier this year. The Fraser Institute reported that a carbon tax that continues to increase to 61 cents per litre will cost the average Canadian worker $6,700 by 2030. And it's estimated it will also reduce Canada's GDP by 6.2% by 2030, resulting in 164,000 fewer jobs. The federal carbon tax will also have a negative economic impact on Canada's real gross domestic product, the GDP, of $25 billion by 2030, according to the government's own figures, numbers the government tried to hide even from the parliamentary budget officer. And that's just carbon tax 1. Recently, Conservatives forced the government to turn over documents on their second carbon tax, which shows carbon tax 2 will cost the Canadian economy an additional $9 billion by 2030. The carbon taxes are not an environmental plan, but a tax plan. Forcing carbon taxes on Canadians has not stopped a single natural disaster. Meanwhile, this NDP Liberal government killed green energy projects like Sustainable Marines Tidal Energy Project and continue to import dirty oil from foreign dictators with poor environmental standards. Canada fell to 62nd out of 67 countries on the Climate Change Performance Index, and Canadians are not going to be fooled. The phantom finance minister, carbon tax Mark Carney, may now be writing government policy from the boardroom of the Liberal Party of Canada, but it was just 1 year ago that he wrote that the Prime Minister was wrong even to exempt home heating fuels from the carbon tax. Canadians face a clear choice between a continuing cost of living crisis with the costly coalition or a Conservative government that will axe the tax. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and to the Minister of Sport and Activity.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Now, look, we've been here before. We've talked about this before with that member and with many other members. But the last I checked, Kelowna Lake Country, beautiful place, is in British Columbia. And there is no federal price on pollution in British Columbia. In fact, it was a Liberal government in British Columbia that brought forward Canada's first carbon pricing system. It has been in effect for over a decade, and it has been drastically reducing the emissions of British Columbia since then. And like that, Canada has also, for the first time since the 1990s, have our emissions under check. And just recently, just yesterday, in fact, the Canadian Climate Institute said that once again in 2023, Canada's emissions have fallen. In addition to that, they said that one of the chief reasons for that was because of carbon pricing, Madam Speaker. Whether it's on the industrial side or the consumer price, carbon pricing works. I don't have a Nobel Prize, and last time I checked, there are no Nobel Prizes in this House of Commons, but one person has, in fact, won a Nobel Prize for carbon pricing, Madam Speaker, and he has said that Canada's carbon pricing system gets it right. Now, you know what? The Conservatives have been using these lines about what's up. And instead of talking about what's up right now, I'd like to talk about what's down. Because currently, inflation is down to the target range, 2%. Canadians, still having a difficult time financially. That's I don't want to make any mistakes. But when inflation comes down, that means prices are on their way down as well. And with that 2% inflation rate, which is right in line with the Bank of Canada's goals, we also have seen that interest rates are down. And with inflation coming down, one of the chief causes of that is lower gas prices. Gas prices have hit lows that we haven't seen since around the pandemic, when they fell because people weren't driving so much. But Madam Speaker, if as the Conservatives say that carbon pricing is causing inflation, the price on pollution in Canada has gone up every year for the last 4 years, and over the last 4 years our inflation has steadily come down. So either the Conservatives can't do math, or they think Canadians are so stupid that they can't do math, or both. I actually don't put it past them that they might just be willing to treat Canadians with no respect and to keep using these tired taglines instead of putting forth some actual policies that will grow our economy and reduce our emissions. Gratefully, Madam Speaker, we're doing just that. But you know what? We're following the lead of British Columbia, and as my colleague from Manitoba, he loves to heckle me, he does it all the time, doesn't impact me whatsoever. Again, not very good arguments that he puts forward. But we've made it very clear. Canadians get more money back through the price on pollution's Canada carbon rebate than they pay. And that's true. That's been clearly stated by the PBO, by 300 economists across this country, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And that means that low and medium income households benefit the most. And I know I'm talking to a Conservative right now. They don't typically care too much about low and medium income households. They usually just focus on corporations and millionaires and which oil and gas CEO is asking them to do one thing or another. But we did just finish a debate on a guaranteed livable income. And Madam Speaker, things like this, the Canada carbon rebate, the Canada child benefit, the GIS, that's more money in Canadians' pockets. And that actually helps Canadians. What doesn't help Canadians is tired three-word slogans from the Conservative Party of Canada.
On the Lake Country?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And for the member to insinuate that I don't care about residents in my community that are lower middle income is pretty awful and pretty shameful. So, but this Liberal member has made the Liberal Party position very clear about the carbon tax. Well, unless you carve out exceptions due to fear of losing elections, like they did in Atlantic Canada. And Conservatives and most Canadians, including those in my community, don't want to keep paying the carbon taxes. And the facts are clear that Canadians are forced to eat less, they're skipping meals, they're buying less healthy food. There's lots of information on this, and there's more lineups in food banks in the millions just to make ends meet. Just recently, Food Banks BC reported that it had served 100,000 food bank users in a single month for the first time. So Canadians cannot afford to endure 12 more months of this cost of living crisis, so they should be given the choice to axe the tax and have a carbon tax election. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a shame that the Conservatives keep using the words of the food banks completely out of context. The food banks, when they propose these things, they also make recommendations. None of the recommendations are to use any of the tired three-word slogans or eliminate a program which is actually supporting low and medium income housing. And they also like to completely ignore the fact that climate change impacts poorer folks more drastically, Madam Speaker. I want to say again, Kelowna Lake Country is in British Columbia, which does not have a federal carbon price. So if the member wants it eliminated, then she needs to talk to the Premier of British Columbia. And they are working on lots and lots of different environmental protection projects out there, and I'd encourage them to do that. Now, Madam Speaker, as I said, inflation is down, interest rates are down, gas prices are down, and so are emissions. And that's thanks to our sound economic policies, not thanks to tired three-word slogans.